everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Iris, which is the podcast series on migration, displacement, and mobility of the Institute for Research into Superdiversity. My name is Seb Rumsby, and I'm a research fellow based here at Iris. And today I'm happy to be joined here with Mariko Hayashi, who is the executive director at UK-based organization Southeast and East Asian Center. She has over 10 years experience working on human rights, migration and displacement as a practitioner in civil society in Asia and Europe. So welcome, Mariko.
Hello.
It's great to talk to you. We've been working a bit together here and there. And first of all, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the Southeast and East Asian Center for those of listeners who may not know much about them, and perhaps what you have found to be the kind of unique challenges or dynamics that Southeast and East Asian background migrants face here in the UK.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's my pleasure to be here and to talk about for Southeast and East Asian Center. So we call it SEEAC for short because it's quite a long name, and it is actually community-led non-profit organization, and it is a migrant-led organization for again, migrants, refugees, people seeking asylum from Southeast Asia and East Asian countries, and people of those heritages who are living in the UK now. So we are based in London, and our primary work is to provide the first point of contact, to be a first of contact, and to be provider of community support services on various issues that people are facing while they're living in the UK. But mainly, our focus has been around well-being and migrant labor rights and identity-based violence, discriminations, and also, of course, immigrations and asylum, signposting people to the right, people where they can get more appropriate or professional support services. But also we try to do campaign and advocacy work based on our lived experiences and also experiences of supporting our community members. So that's about SEEAC.
Great. And okay, so how long have you been working at SEEAC for?
Yeah, so SEEAC is still quite a new organization. So it was formally founded in January 2020, just before the pandemic. But I think it is really a product of the community organizings that's been done for many years from by the community leaders of migrants and refugees who have made UK home. So yeah, I've been working since the beginning for about 3 years.
Right. And based on your experience over these 3 years and more broadly, I mean, do Southeast Asian or migrants from Southeast and East Asian backgrounds face kind of unique or particular challenges when they come to the UK, or are they pretty much the same as other migrants or from other parts of the world? What is the kind of thing that maybe you find kind of interesting or unique about SEEAC's work?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of challenges are shared with other migrants and refugee communities. But I think, the one of the major things is that the lack of regular routes for many people, including people from East and South Asian countries who need to or want to move or continue staying in the UK, that the routes that are accessible and affordable. As we know that there is no visa category for I would say quote unquote low skilled or blue collar workers, except those very short term non-renewable visas for overseas domestic workers and seasonal workers. Those are the 6 month maximum of 6 months, so that's very, very short term. So there is no regular routes for people who have not had an opportunity to have the education or experience to land on the jobs that are considered as skilled in the UK context, but instead, want to come to UK or continue staying in the UK to work as, for example, shopkeepers or cleaners, or work in restaurants or factories and so on. So, even though we know that there are high demands for this type of workforce in the UK, there is no regular route for people to do that. So that's one thing. And I think, there, even though, as I said, there's a demand for those cheap labor, low paid job, while there is no regular route and safe migration route for people who could fill that gap and demand. We know that when the situations like that, there is always people smuggling, trafficking, and exploitations that comes in. So this is again why many members of East and South Asian migrant communities are highly vulnerable to exploitations and modern day slavery in the UK. And even if they are coming to work as a skilled workers, you already have to have a job, and that pays more than required threshold. There's a lot of requirements. It's not straightforward, even for family members, including family members of British people, or being married or having children does not automatically make you eligible to visa in this country. So you must meet the requirements about the employment, income, or accommodations. For over 10 years since the law has changed for family migrants, if you have a migrant, if you're a migrant or you have a migrant family member, the rights to family life somehow has become a privilege. It's not a human right anymore. So I think that's again these all sorts of issues faced by all migrant and refugee communities in the UK. It's shared with East and South Asian migrant communities.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting what you have pointed out, and I think maybe based on my research with especially kind of Vietnamese migration to the UK, and one kind of strange or kind of distinctive feature is how they kind of often get kind of siloed into niches of the economy, which seem to be somehow reserved for people from one particular nationality. So with the Vietnamese, it's almost always nail salons or kind of restaurants to a lesser extent. And I think I can see with like Filipinos, a lot of them end up as working in as care workers or this kind of thing. And that's kind of interesting to wonder, how those kind of economic pathways have happened over time and become kind of fixed and solidified, so that it seems like all Vietnamese people now end up working in that instead of having other options and stuff. Do you see that with kind of other kind of national backgrounds, or is it kind of a particular weird thing about the Vietnamese migration pathway here?
No, I think it's quite common in different communities as well. I think because especially when there's no regular routes, as I said, or a certain kind of labor migration scheme in place, then how people would find their job is to rely on their peers and friends and colleagues who's probably know there are other opportunities or can help them to navigate their life here. So it's kind of common and normal to people from a similar sort of backgrounds or from the same communities to end up in the same workplace and sort of doing similar work to one another. And I think because there's no regular route, or even there is a regular route, it's extremely difficult for people to navigate the system and continue stay on the system. And I think that's also again another reason why maybe people who found themselves in a kind of in that irregular situations to having to depend on the informal social network that they have to make their ends meet as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Okay, So another thing that I'm interested in asking you about, especially with your work at SEEAC, is this idea of kind of the migrant versus the diaspora, which is probably an artificial dichotomy, um, but like SEEAC, you know, in its kind of mission statement, clearly is trying to work with both kind of recent migrants or kind of maybe temporary migrants, and also like long-term diasporas or people from Southeast and East Asian heritage. And again, kind of based on my experience researching the Vietnamese communities here in the UK, I find there's often quite a divide between longer term people of Vietnamese origin or descent who have been living in the UK for decades or all their life, and kind of more recent migrants who have only been here for 5-10 years. You know, they sometimes interact, but there's often a bit of a kind of social cultural divide, and I don't see much kind of in the way of solidarity. Whereas I seem to kind of, I get the impression that at SEEAC some kind of national heritages seem to have a lot more kind of solidarity or integration between like existing diaspora and newer migrants. And so I was wondering just if you had any ideas, you know, how do some, or why does some kind of diaspora groups seem to be more able to integrate or show solidarity with recent newer migrants, whereas others, you have that classic divide of, oh, we've got here now, we don't want any more people coming here because it's going to ruin our reputation, or this kind of thing.
Yeah, thinking about this, I had to pull out one of my books from university more than 10 years ago, because
Oh, right.
I kind of forgot what actually diaspora is. And it's kind of, yeah, I read some, but it didn't really answer my question, because again, it's a question of when people become a diaspora, part of diaspora, when you end being migrants. So that kind of question. So yeah, I think there's kind of that broad sort of lines there. But yeah, no, I think I agree with your observations that in some communities, I think most of communities struggle with kind of intergenerational, and also there's different kind of disparities and divisions within the communities. And I think it's normal, in even when we are back in our home countries, we don't hang out with everyone anyway. And I think but I think we do try to work with people from different generations and different stages of their life as a migrant. And also we do work with, and some of our members and staffs are people who've grown up in the migrant families in the UK. So it's a very diverse situation. But I think Southeast and East Asian communities itself or themselves are very diverse. So I think I take it as a part of our diversity. But and also, I think there are a lot of differences, but I think there are a lot of similarities as well, especially sort of, I mean, I myself identify as a migrant because I came to this country as a young adult, and I grew up in Japan, my home country. So, I kind of, I can relate more for people who are coming to the UK as an adult, and sort of, so-called new migrants, come here as an adult to study, to work, and to be with family. So I can relate with these people more. But throughout my work with SEAC, I learned so much from people who are also similar age to me, but were born here in the migrant families from East and South Asian countries, growing up um, as a British East and South Asians, and they've lived through so many challenges that are, again, quite different sometimes, but very similar at other times. And those different challenges of navigating, life and identities here in the UK, that's something that I cannot really comprehend fully, but I can also share and understand some experiences of racism and discriminations, and yeah, the challenges that they've been through. So I think there are a lot of similarities that we can build solidarities on, and yeah, in fact, I think there are a lot of solidarity movements, and I I often say this, but when we, how we experience challenges might be different in day-to-day life. But when we look at in the bigger picture, I think a lot of it has a similar or same root causes, which is, systemic racism and all these disparities and inequalities. And I think this is where we can build solidarity on. And I think, there are a lot of good solidarity within the communities, I think is, and we don't need to try to understand everything, but I think, um, you know, with the shared experiences, there's a lot of things we can do together.
Okay, so the other topic I wanted to talk to you about, because your expertise and experience goes far beyond your work with SEEAC, is looking at kind of different kind of labor migration regimes, and since Brexit, of course, the UK has been struggling to try and come up with new ways to plug the shortage in labor that we have in many sectors, which were previously held together by kind of EU migration, and now that's off the cards. It's all kind of causing lots of headaches for the UK government, and however, in parts of Southeast and East Asia, there are plenty of other countries who have been kind of implementing this kind of temporary labor migration regime for a long time, where migration is kind of, there's plenty of migration routes available, but it's almost always seen as a temporary phenomenon, something that the government doesn't want people to move here permanently, and this kind of thing. So I was wondering if you could share some of your experiences of looking at not just labor migration, but also kind of migrant rights and exploitation in other places such as Japan or Taiwan or wherever, and how they compare with how the UK is doing at the moment, and if there's anything that could be learned from either good practice in Asia or good kind of resistance and advocacy in Asia context that we could learn from.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the labor migration regimes are quite similar. I think it's very temporary, as you said, and it's very much focused on the labor shortage. It's just to fill the labor shortage, and also like sort of because of that, it's a lot of it's initiated by the. I mean, it's to meet the demand of the countries of origin, and that, and it is often the case that no pathway to settlement or citizenship. You need to keep renewing your short-term visas, and it doesn't lead to citizenship or settlement. And because of that, people do have a limited rights entitlement, including family reunifications or political rights, access to social protections, and so on. I think in general that's very similar, I think. And the one thing that I find it quite interesting is that in some Southeast Asian country, East Asian country as well, there isn't quite big issues around lack of labor rights, especially for certain occupations. So, for example, like for domestic workers, some countries in East Asia, Southeast Asian countries don't recognize or don't include domestic work in their labor standards. And also it can also apply to people working in the fishing industry, especially on the distance water fishing vessels. Those people are not included in the labor standards, so that's a big issue. Whereas in the UK, from my understanding, doing advocacy work in the UK, the government always says that in the UK, wherever you come from, you have the same labor rights, employment rights as everyone else. But what becomes an issue here is in the UK, it's because the immigration policy is so restrictive that people cannot assert the rights that is available on paper. And I think this is something that I find it quite difficult because a lot of issues comes intersection of employment and immigration. So even though you're given the rights as an employee or worker, you as a migrant don't have access to these rights. And I just give you a bit of example because I wanted to talk about this actually when you asked about the challenges faced by recent South Asian migrant communities. As I said, because the regular routes are very limited. And the other issue is the cost of visa fees that is extortionate here in the UK. And it has just changed the last month again. And, most of the visa categories has gone up. The fees has gone up by 15 to 20%. And to justify the cover the cost of the public sector pay rise. But so basically, if you are applying for a spouse visa or partner visa or British citizen or whoever settled in the UK, or as a parent of British child, it would cost £1,846 for 2.5 year visa per person. And that's only visa fee. And those applying for time-limited visa, so we have to pay something called NHS health surcharge to cover the NHS cost. And now that's gone up to £1,035 per person per year.
Wow.
So imagine that if you're a family of 3 or 4. So that is so extortionate. And then that's applied to, the short-term skilled workers as well. And their visas has gone up too. And, on average, if people are applying for 2.5 year visa to work or as a family member in the UK, could cost people £4,000 to £4,500 per person. And I want to put this in the context of Southeast Asia and some East Asian countries, because that is actually about double the amount of some annual income of some Southeast Asian countries. And even in Japan, that's actually probably twice as much of average monthly salary. It's not something that people can pay immediately. So after paying all that money, and often people end up in debt, and this is a temporary visa, and often, most of the time, tied to the employers or their partner or spouse. So you can imagine how that makes people so difficult to stand up for their rights when they find themselves in exploitative or abusive situations at work or at home even. So these visa fee systems really trap people to the exploitative situation if someone is unfortunate to find themselves in that kind of situation. And also it leads to people become undocumented because just there's no way for some people to be able to afford that fee. So I think all that comes in with the issues about the labor rights, because you can say, everyone has a labor rights, but your visa is tied to the employers after you have been in debt to obtain this visa. So this is a very difficult situation in the UK that, how we challenge that that situation.
Sure.
And that's one thing I think I would say. The other thing I would another thing, if I have a bit time, is in the UK labor migration, my observation, it's highly privatized. So I find it quite unclear how the government involves in it, comparing to the labor migration regime in Asia, where it's often sort of written in the government to government cooperation. The economic partnership agreement often stipulate about the labor migration in Asia. Whereas I find it quite difficult in the UK that things are so privatized, and it is very is unclear. But I think that's one of the reasons that it's very expensive, maybe. But it's very unclear where the responsibilities of the government in the labor migration schemes. That's just my observations. I might be wrong.
No, that's
But I
very
think, yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Thank you, Mariko. Yeah. I've got lots of things to think about, but the only last question that I had for you was, given just in your experience of working also with civil society in East and Southeast Asia, can you share any examples of kind of effective advocacy or pressure that's been put on from below that has kind of resulted in any kind of positive outcomes for migrant labor rights or migrant conditions in general in any any context that comes to mind? Or is it
I
all
think,
bad news? I mean, we're used to
no,
bad news here in migration studies.
yeah, I think, I mean, it's, in Asia, especially, it's very difficult, even though we might be successful in bringing some changes in paper, it's very difficult to make changes on the ground, for that paper to be implemented. I think comparing to Europe, or more so, I would say post-Brexit UK, what the uniqueness of Asia, especially Southeast and East Asia, is it has a regional corporations, among different actors. And also what is more unique about it is Southeast Asia itself, and including East Asia, is a region that is a mix of country of origin and destination. Because most of the migration actually happened within the region, comparing to the UK, where, especially post-Brexit, people are migrating from all over the world, different regions. Whereas in Southeast Asia and East Asia, it's a mix of countries of origin and destinations. And that gives kind of opportunities for dialogue and engagement between, either whether it's a government or within the civil society, or between civil society as a government, to kind of have a dialogue, at least within that regional context. And there is a ASEAN Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and within that framework, there is a ASEAN Forum on Migrant Labours, which is a platform between government and the workers' unions and employers. The government, employers, and civil society, including the trade unions and NGOs. And it's a platform to review and discuss and exchange ideas around how to govern labor migrations. And and there's a space for talking about human rights and labor rights, as well as listening from the government and employers' point of view. And also there is go beyond ASEAN, there is a Bali process, which is, again, it's official international forum to facilitate discussion about the human trafficking, human smuggling, and also irregular migration. And that include most of the East Asian countries, and also some Middle East, and I think Australia,
yeah,
as well. So I think there is a kind of regional platform and space where different actors can engage. And although I think Southeast Asia and East Asia, I mean, as Asia as a whole, is a very diverse and have a different political and social sort of context. And especially myself, coming from the civil society, different countries have very different space available for civil societies and human rights activism and campaigning work. I think having that regional platform, regional space and connection is kind of, it helps each other in a way. And I think, thinking about the UK, especially after Brexit, I really think that it's really, really important for the UK government, but also other stakeholders, including civil societies, to really make an effort to connect with other countries, especially home countries of our migrant population, because the migration doesn't start in one place and it's always a saturation. There are a lot of issues that we see people facing here starts from home, and the issues that people face here doesn't end just because they go home. So, I think this kind of corporations and having dialogues and engagement between I wouldn't say sending country of origins and destination is very, very important.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much, Mariko. I think that's all we've got time for, but thanks so much for your time and your really interesting insights. And for those of you who want to find out more about SEEAC's work, we'll have the website link in the blog. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.